So burnout is defined as experiencing long-term, seemingly unresolvable stress related to one's responsibilities, leading to exhaustion and feeling overwhelmed, cynical, hopeless, detached, and ineffective. And one of the reasons that we're doing this talk tonight is because we're worried. And we're worried about the degree of stress and worry that we're all experiencing. And the vulnerability to develop anxiety and to experience the type of exhaustion emotionally and physiologically and physically and just even cognitively and spiritually that can happen, leading to a condition of just feeling burnt out and feeling just hopeless is really, it's really at a high risk of, we're all at a high risk of vulnerability at this time. So I am going to start by talking about what I consider to be like the gifts and the curses of three qualities that are in so many of us that are vulnerable to develop anxiety. And the first of these, I refer to these as really our superpowers. And there's really three superpowers that we are, that I pretty much see and find in anybody and everybody that I treat or I've come to know with anxiety. So the first is that people who experience anxiety very often are sensitive. And by being sensitive, that means that your nervous system is easily activated and more activated or more easily activated than people that you may know. And so the arousal of the nervous system gets activated faster and easier and, excuse me, as a result of being sensitive. So the quality of being sensitive refers to the emotional sensitivity of your nervous system. The second thing that happens, or the second quality, is that people who are more vulnerable for depression have a tendency to be really intense. And intense meaning that this is how they respond to the level of activation of their nervous system gets triggered or activated at a much higher or greater degree of intensity than other people's might. And then finally, people who have this tendency or vulnerability to develop anxiety have a tendency to be persistent. And that means that the nervous system, when it gets easily triggered by stress and the arousal of the nervous system is activated more easily, then because they're sensitive and they have a tendency to have that arousal triggered at a higher degree of intensity because they're intense, it has a tendency to stay there because they're persistent and because their nervous system is persistent. So these are three qualities I want to just introduce us to as we begin to start a process of understanding arousal. So arousal, and the way I teach about this, and the way I teach about anxiety, is this begins with this blank canvas. And what I'm about to show you is how anxiety explodes across somebody's life, in all aspects of someone's life as anxiety develops, the way that you will see this explode across the page or the screen in front of you. So I'm going to step out here and just show you that arousal is how this all begins. So when arousal is triggered because of the sensitivity and the intensity and the tendency for persistence of the nervous system and how it responds to these internal responses when stressors are experienced, arousal is triggered, and again, because of sensitivity, intensity, and persistence, it leads to these three emotional changes. It leads to, three changes: emotional changes, physiological changes, and cognitive changes. Now, to start with this, I want to start focusing on emotional changes. And the emotional changes that are experienced include anger, fear, and this way of feeling like emotionally numb, or as if almost like a freezing or withdrawing type of effect emotionally. So the emotional changes that happen in anxiety, very often, most people don't automatically associate anger with the emotional changes, but that's really, if you've ever heard of the flight, or the freeze response, the anger is certainly significant with the fight, flight, or freeze response, fear or panic with the flight. This emotional numbing is really the freeze response of anxiety. So the fact that these emotional changes happen are important when we think of the intensity of the nervous system, because they can become really extreme. And the first thing that can happen is anger, that fight response can lead to just extreme angry outbursts, explosive outbursts. That fear response can lead to just a sense of panic or terror. And the numbing response can lead to just an intense feeling of emotional paralysis, or almost like a shutting down type of an effect. So while these emotional changes are happening, there are these physiological changes that are experienced. And in the physiological changes, the first thing, these really break down into two types of changes: activating changes and deactivating changes. So the activating changes, I will tell you, are really, you have to imagine, this is what, the activating changes are what our nervous system triggers for us as if we're being chased by a predator. These are the changes in our body and in our nervous system that are going to protect us from a predator. So the brain goes into this super heightened state of alertness. The heart rate increases to get blood to the brain and to the skeletal muscles. And the respiratory rate, or our breathing rate, increases very rapidly so that we get as much oxygen into our blood to get to our brain. And we have our muscles, our skeletal muscles, really tense up intensively in order to be prepared to fight or to flee. And so all that's happening really instantaneously in response to the trigger of arousal being increased. Yet at the same time that these activating responses are occurring, there are these deactivating responses that occur. And in deactivating, that means this turns off or turns down these things that are necessary for sort of long-term survival. So if you're a rabbit being chased by a wolf in a field, the activating responses are what you need in order to be able to run from that wolf. But if the things that rabbit needs to be able to live a long, healthy life get turned down or turned off, so energy can be converted over to activating the responses that are immediately protective. And the first thing that gets turned off is the gastrointestinal system. So blood literally gets shunted away from the stomach and the intestines and gets shunted to the brain and to the skeletal muscles where it's needed in that instant. So chronically, if we're chronically under stress, the stomach and the intestines have decreased blood flow, which means they end up with decreased sort of functioning. So as anxiety is sustained, the issues with long-term problems with digestion and other stomach problems is really frequent and prominent. The other thing that gets turned down is the immune system. So, and this is why when, throughout all of our lives, we've heard, the story that, well, when you're under a lot of stress, you get sick easier. Well, when we're under a lot of stress, our arousal system is activated, and our immune system is purposely turned off or turned down because our brain is interpreting that we're in immediate danger from an external threat. And so what we need to be thinking about right now in the era of COVID-19 is the importance of calming the arousal so that the immune system can be as strong and viable as possible should we become exposed to the virus or to other things that could make us vulnerable to getting sick. The next thing that happens when we're really stressed and we're in this activated state of hyperarousal is all of our functioning that allows us to have intimacy and connections and nurturance and bonding with others is decreased. And again, that's why there's so many kind of personal conflicts that can happen when any one of us are in a persistent state of stress or anxiety. The next thing that gets essentially turned down or turned off is our ability to code our internal words effectively, our internal experiences effectively into words. And so when we are in this heightened state of arousal and we're really stressed and we're having a lot of internal anxiety, one of the things that can happen is we lose the ability to effectively put words to what we're experiencing inside. And so very often when somebody is like really intensely stressed and feeling really anxious, a lot of times somebody is asking, well, what's going on? And the response very often is, I don't know. And in that instant, they're really speaking the truth, because we have to remember we think in words, and therefore if our ability to put words to what we're experiencing internally is turned off or diminished, then we can't even think clearly about what it is that we're experiencing, much less be able to explain that to somebody that we're trying to have a conversation with. And finally, the last deactivating response that happens is sleep. Our ability to fall asleep and our ability to stay or enter into deep stages of sleep are diminished. So again, come back to the idea of a rabbit. So if we think back to the rabbit being chased by a wolf in a field, the rabbit gets away. The rabbit's nervous system is really activated and is really, is keeping that rabbit on alert for other signs or evidence of danger or threats. Therefore, the rabbit is not going to be able to just quickly rest and go to sleep, and the brain knows that. The brain knows the rabbit is fleeing from a wolf, that rabbit can't lay down and rest and take a nap and get re-energized and get more energy to run faster from the wolf. So going to sleep is automatically the ability to do that easily when we're in a state of stress or anxiety is turned down or turned off. And when we do go to sleep, very often we don't go into these deeper stages of sleep. So you're not able to enter into where we really do recover and calm and rest, so that we can awaken from sleep and feeling rejuvenated and re-energized. So the person who is stressed and anxious very often not only has trouble getting to sleep, but are in and out of a restless quality of sleep throughout the entire night. And the end result is they're fatigued. And when we experience fatigue, we crave energy. And when we crave energy, we do one of typically three things. We increase stimulants, such as caffeine or nicotine. We increase stimulation, such as putting our face in front of screens and watching something on a phone or on a TV. And we increase simple sugars. And when we increase our simple sugars, junk food, sweets, simple carbohydrates, what happens is our blood sugar level goes up and rises rapidly. And when our blood sugar level rises rapidly, what happens is our insulin level rises rapidly in our bloodstream. And when our insulin level goes up rapidly in our bloodstream, it pushes our blood sugar down rapidly. And when our blood sugar drops rapidly, our brain interprets that we're in danger. And so the first thing that happens is our arousal goes up even higher. And then we also experience fatigue. So this cycle right here just repeats over and over again. And as you can see, we're about like almost worked our way around this whole canvas, so to speak, this entire screen, and how messy it is. The issue is we're probably about halfway finished with showing you all the things that happen and transpire with this reaction. The other thing that's really important to point out is these arrows are kind of equal signs. So when arousal is increased and that leads to an increase in heart rate, over time, things that activate the heart rate can lead to an increase in arousal. When arousal is increased and it leads to a decrease in the blood flow in the gastrointestinal system and causes stomach problems or digestive problems, when we have stomach problems or digestive problems, that can trigger arousal. So as we finish the rest of this, keep that in mind as you go through this. One of the complicating things with anxiety is that it has a tendency to lead to changes, and those changes cause more anxiety or an activation of more arousal. So the cognitive changes that occur include being internally distracted. So the person who is anxious is experiencing a lot of thoughts internally where they're not thinking about, or they're not able to like really pay attention to somebody in front of them and what they're saying and what they're speaking, because they're being flooded internally with worried thoughts that are often ruminating thoughts that repeat over and over again. And these include intrusive memories of things that did or did not happen in the past, or anticipatory worries of things that may or may not happen in the future. So those worried thoughts, whether they're intrusive memories or they're anticipatory worries, whenever they happen, every single one of those thoughts leads to a higher activation of arousal. And then finally what happens is there are cognitive distortions. And by cognitive distortions, what I mean by that is the individual has gaps in what they know and understand because they can't pay attention because they're internally distracted, and they're flooded internally with worried thoughts and memories of things that are happening, and they're trying to think about, and they can't stop the thoughts as they're happening. So they get gaps in what they know of what's really happening, and they fill them in with the worst case scenario. If you're anxious and you have a gap in what you know and understand, then you fill in the gap with what we call catastrophic thinking. And when we have catastrophic thinking, then we have a tendency to use our habit of negativity, which is constantly scanning for all the things that can go wrong and constantly noticing all the negative emotions, including fear, that we're experiencing. And that leads to even more cognitive distortions. And this also is a pattern or a cycle that each and every single one of us can get stuck in or trapped in the middle of the pandemic that we've been experiencing. Okay, so now what I want to do is point out just how messy this entire diagram is, and all of these changes that can happen as a result of anxiety lead to problems. Very often they lead to interpersonal problems, and when we have interpersonal problems, very often that's a trigger for even more activation of arousal, so the cycle just perpetuates. Very often there's problems in how we're functioning or performing at work or getting our things done at home, and that leads to an awful lot of negative feedback that we either give ourselves or that we are getting from others, and as a result, that leads to even more arousal of our nervous system, the more of the stress response. Then there's behavior changes. And the behavior changes that often can occur have a lot to do with avoiding the triggers of anxiety, avoiding the things that make us uncomfortable, avoiding the discomfort. And that pattern becomes a really vicious, very uncomfortable habit that makes confronting things that are potentially scary or frightening or just difficult or challenging or uncomfortable, we very easily can develop a habit of just avoiding all of those kind of triggers. And very often the person who's really struggling with anxiety just continues to withdraw more and more and more from the world around him or her. The next type of behavioral change that can occur has to do with kind of controlling your world as much as you can, shrinking your world down into something that's really small and controllable, that is really protective or feels safe, as a way also of avoiding further triggers of anxiousness. And these two patterns in behavioral changes that can occur are very often a very common trigger to leading to patterns of addictive behaviors, whether it's from alcohol, marijuana, other drugs, video games, gambling. There's lots of different patterns that evolve that can be addictive in their quality, that can lead to enormous consequences, that are a result of this tendency to develop into a habit of avoidance. And obviously there's consequences as a result of these behavioral changes and these patterns that trigger more arousal. And finally, the final area that is really impacted is this entire response system has perhaps some of the greatest impact on our sense of meaning and purpose that we can confront in our lives. And so when we are feeling detached from our sense of meaning and purpose, that's a really terrifying way to exist, and very often is a very powerful trigger for even more arousal and activation of the nervous system in this way. And that is actually the pattern of how stress triggers arousal, and when sustained, leads to this pattern of anxiety that can develop. Now, with one of my patients years ago, I paused right here, and this patient of mine happened to have been an artist, and we got to this point where I had been drawing, and I went to medical school, I didn't go to art school, so I cannot draw very well at all. And when I got to this point, and this drawing was really pretty much in this same way, she looked at the drawing and she said what she saw there was a butterfly. And for her, the butterfly was the symbol of transformation. And it was the symbol of growth and growing out of the situation that anyone is in. And that was a really powerful image for her in coming to understand this pattern of anxiety that had been with her for years and years. And as you think about those four petals of the wings, rather, of a butterfly, it really does help us orient ourselves to sort of think about how do we begin? Where do you start to respond to this sustained arousal in the condition of anxiety when you finally are able to recognize the signals that are there and try to change the patterns that have developed? So the first thing we do is we use this kind of information to help us focus on signals and signs that my stress is high and my anxiety level is high. The second thing is to really focus on calming the arousal down. So often we try to stop a symptom or to correct one of the changes that occurs. But if we can get to the root of what we're experiencing and try to calm the arousal and quiet it or calm it, it is the second most important thing that we can do to get control over this. And the third thing that's critical is to transform this pattern of thinking. More than anything, in people who suffer from anxiety, the way that they think has become a habit. And one of the things that we need to do is to essentially break the patterns or the habits of thinking in such a negative manner, or that automatic pattern of ruminating, worried thinking, and start to come up with ways to replace some of those thoughts intentionally and gain control of them. And this pattern of recognizing our signals, calming the arousal, and transforming our thinking brings us to being able to embrace discomfort, so that the discomfort we actually have the skills to confront and can therefore help us sort of move through that period of challenge and discomfort rather than triggering such profound patterns of avoidance. So to break this down, what I would start with is saying that we have a way of thinking about our mental health and well-being, I think, differently today than we have historically. Because if we reorient ourselves from thinking about all the problems and symptoms, we think about opportunities, we can begin a pattern of transforming kind of how we're doing. And each and every single one of us has that ability. So I talked today about vitality, and I define vitality as your current state of mental health and well-being through a global, whole person view of yourself. And some of the research that we've been doing at my organization called Praestan Health, in looking at measurements of vitality and the way we measure it through a way of measuring our well-being in 4 different worlds of our living, and the way we measure health practices, and we measure emotional health and physical health and living health, and then our kind of readiness to undergo change. It's a very complex measurement of well over 50 items that makes essentially a vitality index. We've identified one measure that has almost a 0.9 correlation coefficient, which is almost a 1-to-1 equal measurement. One question that is a real indicator of somebody's measurement of vitality in the way that we measure it today. And that is this question on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is you're struggling and 10 is you're thriving. How happy, healthy, and fulfilled are you now? And that measurement, that question is one I am finding reveals to me from a gestalt, this one number gives me a sense of this whole person view of where this person may be, or where I may be as I think about it, just in checking in with myself. So a way for us to just kind of come to understand the impact of whatever it is we're experiencing. This is a brief, simple way to just pause and reflect on where am I really at this moment in time, and what do I then do about it? And so the next thing to think about what I do about it is thinking about our 4 worlds of living. So we think about well-being as really a definition of how happy, healthy, and fulfilled you are, and how well you're thriving in your internal world, your physical world, your external or your social world, and also your spiritual world. And in each of those 4 worlds, there are these things that we call health practices. And a health practice are the thoughts, the behaviors, and the habit that determine your well-being. Your health practices impact your well-being and your overall health. And these are things that we actually have control over changing. And in each of these 12 health practices that we have identified and we work with, we've identified habits or patterns that can be changed, and we can develop our health practices to a point of mastery where we actually have needed skills that allow us to cope and confront challenges and deal with stresses in a much more effective way, so that overall we're more resilient. So if we come back to these 4 arms of the butterfly, so to speak, the very first arm, just to review, had to do with a place where we each and every single one of us can begin, is in recognizing the signals. Recognizing the signals of arousal being elevated, and these included recognizing our emotional signals, our body signals, those physiological activation and deactivation signals, and recognizing our thought signals, those worried, intrusive those anticipatory worries, those intrusive memories, that pattern of catastrophic thinking. And then remembering that the problems related to that arousal, that anxiety, have to do with relationship problems, performance or functioning problems, behavioral problems such as avoidance, and spiritual signals, feeling just detached and demoralized, or not feeling connected with your sense of meaning and purpose. These are signals. And so we talk about them as signals today as opposed to problems or flaws or symptoms. When we think about them as signals, it helps us step back and recognize, okay, I'm really stressed, my arousal's overly activated, and I need to begin the process of calming that arousal. So to calm the arousal, we try to think of ways and rituals that we can bring into our life that allow us to calm our emotions, to calm our body, and to quiet or to calm our thoughts. And to calm our thoughts, we need to transform our thinking. And to transform our thinking, we need to think first that there are these things that I call hot burner thoughts. And hot burner thoughts are that tendency to ruminate, of those worried thoughts that trigger even more arousal. And the reason I call them hot burner thoughts is that if you accidentally put your finger on a hot burner on a stove, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pull your finger away because it hurts. But as humans, we have a tendency to have a painful thought that when we experience it, we repeat it over and over and over again. So unlike putting our finger on a hot burner on a stove where we immediately pull it away because it hurts, when we experience a painful, worried thought, we repeat it over and over again, and it just perpetuates the pain and the worry. That's a hot burner thought. So one of the first things we need to do is identify the hot burner thoughts, those worries, those memories, those cognitive distortions, because of the gaps that we know and we have, and we are filling in with really scary stuff that may not be real, and the tendency to lead to catastrophic thinking. So if we can recognize those as signals, and we can mind the gaps by filling in these gaps of what we know and understand with much more accurate information, then we can help ourselves from falling into that pattern of continuously scanning for the negative or the threats that are there, and recognizing also in the midst of even a crisis or chaos, the positives that we are experiencing and the positive and the opportunities that are actually there. So we try to move from having this pattern of negative thinking to a pattern of embracing hopeful, optimistic, and much more compassionate thoughts. And we can help ourselves do that through a simple practice of positivity scanning, which I will review in a minute. So the first thing here, this is a tendency that we all do really well. And I don't need to teach you how to scan for negative emotions, because as humans, we are all masters at scanning for negative emotions. This is an overdeveloped strength, and therefore it's an overused skill that we all have. When we feel these, we have a tendency to know that we feel these. The problem is we're not very skilled at intentionally noticing and focusing on positive emotions that we experience, particularly when we're feeling stressed. And it's really important to look for and scan for feelings of joy and gratitude and serenity and interest and hope and pride and amusement and inspiration, awe and love. It is literally impossible if we are really allowing ourselves to embrace feeling truly grateful for something important or meaningful that happened today or that's happening right now in this moment. It's really impossible to experience the symptoms of anxiety or that activation of arousal at the same time that we're experiencing or embracing that emotion of gratitude. So very often, if we have a practice of being able to scan for positive emotions more effectively, we can calm our minds in that pattern of intense negativity scanning that is going on continuously. So the final sort of thing that we want to try to do to sort of respond to anxiety when we experience it is embrace discomfort. And we do this by recognizing our avoidance behaviors, by discovering really what really matters the most to us, by really pausing and trying to get in touch with what are the values that matter the most to me, and what are the strengths that I have used continuously throughout my life, the qualities that make up who I am, and think about how I've used them in the past to be able to overcome this tendency to automatically avoid, so that we can be more comfortable embracing things that feel scary or uncomfortable or painful or challenging to us. And so once we start this process, we can gradually start finding ourselves intentionally overcoming the patterns of avoidance by engaging in things that really matter the most to us. And once we start engaging in the things that matter the most, our ability to expose ourselves to those things that trigger profound fear and stress for us is so much greater, and we gradually can start tolerating discomfort and pain and challenges in a much more effective manner. So I'd like to just leave us with some things that each of us can do at perhaps one of the greatest periods of uncertainty and stress and disruption to our everyday lives that we have had perhaps ever in our existence on this planet together. The first message is that you can calm your anxiety and build your emotional resiliency and your well-being in this era of COVID-19 by learning to keep calm and being strong together. And by tending to your whole self and by using new strategies in each of your health practices that I'm going to actually walk us through as a closing here, you can be strong by building your vitality. And if we are tending to our vitality, then we can be assured that our immune systems perhaps are as optimal as they perhaps possibly can be. And that's really important for each and every single one of us right now. So the first message I'd like to leave us with, the first of these 12 little pearls that we can do, the first is to soothe the arousal of our nervous system by using strategies to calm our body and minds when we're feeling stressed. So here's 2 things to do. Practice breathing mindfully so that you're aware of your breath and you can regulate it intentionally in order to calm your heart rate, to slow your thinking down, or to quiet those thoughts, and to relax those really tense muscles. Try to practice meditating for just a couple minutes a day. And we don't have to dive into deep, prolonged periods of meditation if you're not practicing it. By meditating, I'm actually suggesting here to just be quiet and still and just reflect on something simple and calm to break the pattern of those continuous worried thoughts that are so easy to be happening right now. The next thing we can do is to try to change our thinking habits. And our goal is to try to think more hopefully and compassionately and optimistically and positively. And we can do this by catching ourselves or catch yourself when you're spiraling into these repetitive worried thoughts, when you're really stuck on those hot burner thoughts and you can't stop them. In response to great worries right now, many of us, if not all of us, need a moment of being able to tap out. And by tap out, I mean asking someone you know to help you see possibilities and to think about the potential that you actually can start to look for and start to see when you can just give your mind a break from these patterns of worried thinking. Each and every single one of us needs to rest well right now. We can do this by intentionally tending to your routine to get ready for sleep, to make sure you're getting enough sleep each night. Take time to prepare for sleep by engaging in calming mind and body rituals before bed, and practice strategies to overcome insomnia if needed. You can hydrate well, believe it or not. Remaining hydrated is an important part of managing your stress. Keeping your nervous system as best functioning as possible. We need to drink water throughout the entire day. Know how much water you should drink each day, and try to savor what you drink. So when you do drink water, pay attention to it. Pay attention to how much you're drinking throughout the day, so that at the end of the day, you can ask yourself the question, did I drink enough water today? And that's just an easy thing to focus on. And when we focus on a simple habit to try to improve, it again brings our brain away from the things that are really easy to worry and be preoccupied with. Nourish well by making half of what you eat vegetables and fruits. Make the other half of what you eat a mix of proteins, fats, and whole grains, and minimize highly processed foods with added sugar and added salt. Move well by moving intentionally throughout the day. With each and every single one of us being at home so much more, many of us are not as active, although many of us are getting outside and going for walks more than before, so we actually have some increased activity. But we can move well and improve how we move by decreasing the time we're being sedentary, by inserting regular physical activity breaks into our day each and every single day. So work towards goals of working towards being more physically active, being more mobile, doing things to improve your fitness even slightly, and doing things to improve your strength each and every single day. You can improve how you express yourself. And you can express well by expressing your thoughts and your feelings and your needs to others more clearly and more effectively. And we can do that best by keeping calm and honoring what we're experiencing in order to put words effectively to those experiences that we're having internally. So try to be fully present and actively listening to the thoughts, the feelings, and the needs that you yourself are experiencing and that are also being expressed by others. Connect meaningfully with others by being extra kind. Nurture those relationships that are most meaningful to you. And activate yourself, particularly during a period where everything feels disrupted. Go ahead, use schedules, lists, timers, and any other kind of nudges that you can to keep up with all of your roles and all of your responsibilities, because your regular day-to-day routines are a lot of times not there right now. Do even little things each day that help you feel successful and fulfilled at home, at work, or at school. Observe the present moment by experiencing good things that happen and being grateful for them in the moment that they occur. Practice embracing acceptance of what you can control and what you can't control right now. Make intentional effort to experience the wonder and the awe in yourself, in your family members, and in your life. And embrace the greatest moments that you experience in each day. Seek a sense of meaning and purpose by using your greatest strengths to do the things that matter most to you. Each day be reminded of each of your greatest strengths so that you can be best connected to doing those things that give you the most meaning and purpose. In other words, we use our strengths to allow us to do what matters most if we can be in touch with what our strengths really are. And finally, believe in your greatest values that make you who you are. Intentionally stay connected to what your values are. You know, if you can't list your top 5 values that are most important to you, spend some time to really identify them and discover what those are. And then create a reminder that you can use each day of what's most important in your life so that you can stay in touch with that. So, as a final message, we can all get through this together by keeping calm, by being strong, and seeing the potential that lies before us. And that is the end of that portion of the talk, and we have some time for questions or responding to comments as they've come through. I will apologize for some chaos that was going on initially. There was a lot of movement going on in the room as we were just trying to finally get this off. So I was distracted. I was feeling internally and externally distracted. But I think I can address questions if things I tried to present did not come across clearly enough. So is there something that rises up right now that would be worthwhile addressing?
I'm waiting for them to come.
So there's one question here in the room just about the idea of, does everybody experience what I just presented about anxiety in the exact same way? And the answer to that obviously is no. And I think the more that we have an understanding of that being able to think about anxiety through this lens of arousal, and we can understand the emotional changes, the physiological changes, and the cognitive changes as signals that arousal is being activated, then we can identify these potential patterns that many of us, if not all of us, are vulnerable to at some level. So, okay.
Any words for children? Any words of how to help your children?
So, children experience anxiety exactly as I just manifested and as I just explained, just like adults do. One of the things that happens in children that is really powerful is that tendency to lose the ability to code into words what they're experiencing internally is we have to think of as magnified. So children very often will behaviorally express the activation of arousal that they're experiencing internally. It's far too common for children to become really activated, restless, and in response to worried thoughts and things that they are experiencing, they may be putting words to them that they know, or they may communicate very frequently if we're asking what's going on, and they're using things like, I don't know. And very often, as I pointed out, they won't know because they won't be able to put words to what it is that they are actually feeling or thinking internally. So I think right now more than anything, our children need us to be as calm and steady as possible, because one of the things that I did not point out here that I emphasize or teach as often as I can is that arousal begets arousal. So when we are feeling stressed or overly activated or overly aroused and we're interacting with one of our children, our arousal is going to elevate or activate the arousal in our child. If our child is really stressed or really activated, that our child's arousal is going to trigger an activation of arousal in us. And so the better we are as adults of paying attention to what our child is experiencing as in thinking through this lens of stress and arousal, then we can recognize their arousal activating us, and we can try to practice some of the things that we need to practice in order to keep ourselves as calm as we can And the calmer we are, the more effective we're going to be at helping the child calm his or her arousal. So.
Another one is, do you have any special guidance or tips for people who are living alone during the COVID?
So the question there is, do I have any special guidance or tips for people who are living alone during the COVID? And I think that we have to connect, right? And, you know, if you're living alone and you don't have somebody to physically, quote, tap out to when your thoughts are getting the best of you and are getting overwhelming and you are noticing the signals of worried thinking just getting really out of control, this is where we have to use our technology. We have to pick up our phones. We have to make a FaceTime or a video call. We have to email somebody and just be really clear about, okay, I'm really stressed and I need you to just take over my brain for a minute. I need your brain to just help me reframe and see some positive things that we're experiencing right now because I can't stop the worried thinking. This idea of tapping out right now is something that I think each and every single one of us really needs to try to practice with one another. And we can't assume that because we haven't heard from somebody who might be living alone that they're doing fine. I mean, each and every single one of us are in this together, and I think we need to be doing our best to just be checking in with one another. And if you are alone and you are not being checked in with others and you're not reaching out to check in with others to let them know that you're okay, you need to do that. I mean, that's just something that, again, we've been able to take for granted seeing each other so much more than we are right now. And so we have to be intentional about reaching out and connecting.
What path do the individuals who deal with severe anxiety follow when they choose to work on getting healthier?
So what path do individuals who experience anxiety follow when they choose to work on getting healthier? And the very first thing that happens is they start to learn about themselves in a very different way. They start to see that what they've been experiencing as a result of an overly sensitive nervous system, and a lot of the changes that they've experienced are a result of having a sensitive nervous system. It just happens to be very often the nervous system that they've been dealt. And then what they need to do is try to identify the patterns that they have developed as a result of having that sensitive nervous system, and then work to break those patterns and develop new skills that can replace those old patterns. That's the easiest, I can't say it's easy, that's the most effective approach that can lead people to experiencing life completely differently if they've lived for a long time with anxiety. So here's a way to think about that. You have habits. So people who develop anxiety have developed profound habits in how they think and in how they feel in response to things. And thinking of the way that you think as just a habit helps us separate from those thoughts and develop new ways of responding and new ways and new patterns of thinking. So it all begins with insight and understanding in a different way. Next question.
It was a wonderful presentation, and you provided 12 strategies to tend to your host self. All of these are important, but would you say some are more important than others after soothing the arousal?
I would say that right now, I feel like soothing the arousal and transforming the thinking are two things that each and every single one of us needs to try to practice more intentionally every single day. So the question, if I can repeat the question just to make sure that everybody could hear that. So there's 12 recommendations of things that we can each do right now that is really a reflection tending to our whole entire self, really across these 4 worlds of our living that I've mentioned. And of those 12, aside from soothe and soothing the arousal, is there another area that feels that's most important? And I'm going to add right now, because I do feel like recognizing these negative patterns of thinking that can lead to a very catastrophic way of thinking is critical. And recognizing those patterns and really trying to practice thinking through a lens of positivity as best as we can, and trying to embrace hope and self-compassion and some degree of optimism in a light of such stress is the next most important thing to be doing. I also think that in these great times of stress and uncertainty, it's really, really important to be trying to be present in the moment and paying attention to the good things that are happening each and every single day in each of our lives, and trying to embrace gratitude for them when they occur, and being in tune with what matters the most to us, and not losing sight of what's giving us our sense of meaning and purpose each and every single day. So.
One other question, is your group a counseling center, and are you offering virtual visits?
So Praestan Health, which I didn't really talk at all about yet. So Praestan Health is a behavioral health care and digital health technology startup. We are clinicians, and we do offer virtual visits, and so we are available online. And we have our program, which is based on this model that I use, and it's everything that we do kind of is through this lens of thinking of our whole self. Our program, Portages, is coming out at the end of this month in the mobile app form, like newly released, and we really feel at a time when it's potentially very helpful to have something like that available to us. So, but yes, we can be found online, and you can reach out to us, and our contact information is there.
Would you, as you're wrapping up, let them know we're going to show the video that was supposed to be shown at the beginning?
Great.
Now, if they want to stay on.
Okay, super. So we do have the video that we had technical difficulties starting to kind of introduce the mental health series. And we're going to play that now, and then the program will wrap up. And the handouts of these slides are available online, correct? Okay. Thank you all very much, and we apologize again for all the technical difficulties at the start, and we hope that you can get something out of the messages tonight. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you here tonight. My name is Vicki Elliott, and I am the Director of Mental Health Connect. And we are so happy at Mental Health Connect to be partnering tonight with the Monday Mental Health Series with Bethlehem Lutheran Church and St. Joan of Arc Catholic Community. We have a fantastic speaker for you tonight, and it's a topic that all of us can relate to right now. Worry, stress, uncertainty, and how do you handle that? What can we do when there's so many uncertain things in our lives right now? Our speaker tonight is Dr. Reed Sulik, and the title of his presentation is Moving from Being Anxious to Being Smart, Safe, and Strong Together during COVID-19. One of the things that I personally am really looking forward to hearing is he is going to learn about the superpower qualities that people with anxiety have. I can't wait to hear about that. A little bit about Mental Health Connect. We are a nonprofit organization based in the Twin Cities, and we collaborate with faith communities, a lot of faith communities, and we are all working together to provide resources, education, and access to mental health services for all people. If you know of a faith community that would be interested in hearing more about our mission, joining us, I would love for them to go to our website, mhconnect.org. Also, feel free to give out my email. I am happy to answer any questions. My email is velliott@mhconnect.org. I think that we need mental health services now more than ever. We need each other and to be working together more than ever. I hope you enjoy the speaker tonight. I hope you find some value and some tools that you can use from it. And we are so happy to be here with you tonight. Thank you.